Reformation was a chaotic time. It was a time when being a jobless student activist holds the same weight as being a finance bro, where Budiman Sujatmiko was still the teenage heartthrob of many Indonesians, where Iwan Fals was the most important shitposter.
Namaku Sigma, rumahku aging, mewing strike banyak berlimpah.
And obviously, when democracy came to Indonesia at last. America won the Cold War just a few years back and capitalist democracy became fashionable. Indonesia just got out of a 35-year-long dictatorship and it needed a leader of more appropriate mindset. We've discussed about Sukarno's Frankenstein socialism and Suharto making Indonesia a more family-friendlier place in a way that his family and friends basically dominates everything here in our country. Now, we go on to talk about the third president, BJ Habibie. A bit about Habibie. Back around the 1990s, Suharto realized that he needed technocrats to actually run the government instead of his rubber-stamped yes man. Suharto had the brilliant idea of promoting the guy who made the first planes for Indonesia as the Minister of Research and Development in hopes of pushing Indonesian technology. At the time, Suharto's political strategy was that he wanted to reapproach the Islamic clerics, who were mostly Western educated and smart, to stop talking cap about the government and actually join them. The thing is, most Indonesians back then listened to these Islamists because they were the only people who talked smack about Suharto and lived to tell the tale. Suharto was too much of a pussy to murk the Islamists because they were men of God. Coincidentally, Habibie was also pretty heavy on being an Islamist. He was the leader of the ICMI, Ikatan Cendekiawan Muslim Indonesia. Basically Islamic scholars, and best of all, he was fucking smart. Man was a straight-up engineer and made planes when most of his peers in Indonesia could only build rafts. He was a walking industrial revolution, just like Dr. Vegapunk from One Piece. Or at least that was what Suharto thought, since most of Habibie's programs did not take off due to the rampant corruption in our country. So what better way than to make the Islamists comply by making the smartest Islamist become the vice president? Suharto finally made Habibie into his Habibie. This essentially made Habibie into a figurehead, an appeasement figure for the Islamists. But still, 1998 happened, Suharto ran the economy to the ground because being a NAFO bro, he thought IMF was going to bail him out, but no, he was done for, and Kissinger wasn't there anymore to save his ass. What followed is the unexpected rise of Habibie becoming the third president of Indonesia. The first ever non-Javanese president, which is a pretty huge deal back in Indonesia at the time. The same way Americans mostly choose WASPs as presidents, Indonesians choose Javanese as presidents. Habibie's rule began. Habibie was a highly sophisticated, virtuous, and multi-layered man. Habibie possesses a strong Islamic foundation that shapes his virtue and governance, and his intellectual capabilities, Western background, and technical education translate into a vision for an advanced Indonesia where ideas such as democracy and freedom are enshrined and knowledge is highly valued. His goal of progressing Indonesia and developing its society, politics, and economics using technology applied to practical politics instead of political compromise makes him a technocrat. Unlike Sukarno, who personally settled for an ideology, and Suharto, who had no clue what the f*** his ideology is supposed to be outside of making his friends and family run the government, Habibie probably understood but never claimed that he was a technocrat, and he was a virtuous one at that. This is interesting because at the time, Indonesian politics was still tight on family and friends. It goes like this. Suharto would choose whoever he knows rather than whoever made sense. And this practice often led to abuse ranging from collusion to corruption. Habibie, being an intellectual who was more inclined to merit rather than connection and having a profound internal sense of piety, naturally avoided this sort of practice. These traits are exemplified even earlier before his presidency. Habibie, as a minister, picked 3 Indonesian engineers from his tenure in MBB to his technological projects and bureaucratic structures as key figures. And during his tenure as minister, Habibie advocated for Indonesia to have a highly sophisticated market through technological development. This was also surprisingly opposed by the Berkeley Mafia, such as Ali Wardana, former finance minister, by relentlessly stating that what Habibie wanted was not what Indonesian people needed due to Indonesia's circumstances back then, which is limited capital resources. His advocacy was rooted from his desire to see Indonesia become similar to Germany and Japan in terms of governance and economy, which could also be seen through his program Pemberdayaan Rakyat policy contained in TAP MPR nomor 10 dan TAP MPR nomor XVI, what is XVI again? 16 MPR 1998. This aimed to recover Indonesia's critical economic state by providing a platform and aid for small businesses. The Habibie administration allocated 8.8 billions of Indonesian rupiah to 5.13 millions of farmers through 189,000 of farmer groups and 9.5 thousand unions throughout Indonesia. But Habibie's greatest gift to Indonesia was freedom. Habibie's administration managed to reform the freedom of press, which obviously leads to the freedom of speech, by simplifying the bureaucratic process to acquire Surat Izin Usaha Penerbitan, which was intentionally and coercively to be convoluting throughout Suharto's regime that was controlling and strict, that the government could easily retract the permission of the media or pressuring them to self-censor their content. So remember that next time you decide to make content against the government, thank Habibie. Among other relaxations of freedom, Habibie gave us the Undang-Undang Partai Politik nomor 2 tahun 1999, which allowed the opportunity to create new political parties. Undang-Undang nomor 5 tentang larangan praktek monopoli dan persaingan tidak sehat. He also ratified the 4 key points of International Labour Organization Convention, which is the freedom to create a union, prohibitions of acts of discrimination, and standardization of age of work. Keputusan Presiden nomor 85 tahun 1998 that gave amnesty for some political prisoners that were accused of trying to pull a coup against Suharto. Habibie believed in values that were of high integrity, and he approached a lot of issues from heavily technical approaches. And all of that culminates in his vision for Batam. Suharto wanted to turn Batam into a modern city, while Habibie wanted it to be a rival to Singapore. He's unyielding in his attempt to make Batam as a region which could provide and generate profits, and can also be held as a pride of the country by exporting high-tech and high-value products, which was his aim in the first place in the industrial sector, which can produce a high-quality manufactured goods to be exported, as he was also not fond of over-dependent condition towards Malaysia and Singapore regarding importing goods. But Batam, for all of its promises, didn't end up becoming like Singapore. No, it instead became Madripoor for Marvel Comics. As a verdict, we can safely conclude Habibie's political alignment was religiously progressive, democratic, and believed in the acceleration of industrial sectors. Sadly, for all of his merits, Habibie fumbled. His focus on policymaking and ignorance of politics led to Harmoko and Golkar pulling an etu brute on him. And his decision to give Timor-Leste their independence was a huge L to the army and Wiranto, who was still quite powerful back in the days. So the lesson we can learn from here is that we can be smart as much as we like, but all of that is yapping if we don't have lots of friends. Also, maybe to not have such an obsession with planes.
Subscribe to the Based Indonesian Show. Dijamin halal